Before we start, I just want to go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, we humble ourselves before you today. Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us. Lord, I pray today that as I share the story of your power and your might, there would be some who would have their faith built in you. Lord, I pray for some people who have been hopeless, that they would have their hope restored. Lord, today, let our trust be built in you. Let our heart be broken for the lost. Draw us nearer to you, O God. On Monday, April 10th, 2023, I said goodbye to my family for a very short trip to Africa with a missionary from our church, J.T. Espejo, and our missions pastor, Randy Jumper. The plan was to spend 36 hours in Rwanda and 48 hours in Sudan, exploring partnership with the Rwandan and the Sudanese Assemblies of God. Before we left for Africa, I had the same dream 2 nights in a row. God showed me a man that I would meet in Africa and a message that I was supposed to share with him. God loves you, he knows your name, and he has a plan for your life. And the second night of that dream, I felt that God gave me the name of that man, Ahmad. Now, I took note of it, but I didn't think much of it because if I'm honest with you, I rarely have dreams that make sense, and most of the time, I pray my dreams don't come true. And on Friday, April 14th at 2 o'clock in the morning, we landed in Khartoum, Sudan. And our team leader in Sudan, Alberto, picked us up, and we checked into our hotel, the Corinthia, around 3 o'clock in the morning. After 4 hours of sleep, we drove 30 minutes to a small community, and we were amazed at what we saw. Thousands of mud-built homes filled with second and third generation refugees. They built their homes by hand on government land, knowing that at any moment, if the government wanted to, they could bulldoze the entire community and kick everyone out. We pulled up to a small open-air tarp-covered space. It was their church, and service was a beautiful experience. You may recognize that song. I've decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. After they sang, I was invited to preach, and it was an incredible honor to speak to them and to share about Jesus' love. And that final calm morning in Sudan before all hell broke loose, I shared one of my favorite promises found in Scripture, John chapter 16, verse 33. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Only God knew what would happen less than 24 hours later. The children and the adults in that service would experience this world trouble like never before. On Saturday, April 15th, while waiting in our hotel room on the 8th floor of the Corinthia, we looked out of our window over the Nile River at the city of Khartoum. All of a sudden, we saw movement on the other side of the Nile at the base of a construction site. We quickly grabbed a camera and we took a picture, but we still couldn't really tell what was happening in the moment. We now know that it was the military preparing for a firefight across the river in our direction. At 10:05 a.m., we saw and heard the first explosions that began the battle in Khartoum. And we quickly realized that this was much more than just a political demonstration. The bombs got louder and closer. The building rattled from the concussion of the explosions. The hotel lobby that we moved to for safety was filled with about 22 guests from all over the world and around 30 of the staff of the hotel. Continual bursts of gunfire on the streets echoed through the large empty lobby. And we sat there with no information. unsure of what was happening and wondering if our building was going to be the next target. Now, it's certainly a flaw in my personality, but I ran the worst case scenario about 100 times. And faced with a new anxiety and fear, the reality that these could be my last moments alive, I wondered, am I okay with dying? And sitting on the couch in the lobby, positioned between large pillars and walls as the sounds of gunfire and bomb continued, I closed my eyes and I prayed. I asked the Lord to forgive me, to take care of my wife Meredith, the rest of my family, and that His will would be done. Tensions were high. We were all on edge. There were lots of what ifs and uncertainties. The staff turned on the news, which was in Arabic. Now, you may not know this, but none of us speak Arabic. So trying to figure out what the news was saying was a comical process. We discovered that Google Translate has a photo feature. You can take a picture and it will translate the language into English. And so we would take pictures of headlines trying to determine what they were saying and figure out what was happening. The problem was it wasn't perfect. My favorite one from that time was this one that says, the Sudanese army and rapid support exchanged accusations of groceries in the stomach. And I thought, if this is over lettuce, I'll pay for it. Can we just stop? And we watched the news as the conflict quickly escalated. The international airport was bombed. Passenger planes were destroyed, captured by the militia. A local TV and radio station was captured. The city was falling apart, and we were right in the middle of it. Our hotel was about half a mile away from the presidential palace, where the fighting was the worst. And we knew it was bad, but we had no idea how long the journey would last. That afternoon, my dad encouraged us to start a journal of everything that happened. And we called that journal our captain's log. Just reading the log would take longer than we have in this service. It's 36 pages filled with the ups and downs of our experience in Sudan, where they happened, the exact times when they happened. That night, we decided to stay together in one room. Something about being together brought comfort and security. So we brought 2 twin-size mattresses from one room and we put them on the floor of another. Honestly, it felt a lot like camp. It was quite the setup. And at 10:30 p.m., the end of our first day in the war zone, we decided to try and sleep. A mere 41 minutes later, at 11:11 p.m., we heard the sound of a fighter jet. It started in the distance, but got increasingly louder as the jet approached. The walls of the hotel began to rattle as the low-flying jet got nearer and nearer. And then suddenly we heard a new sound. It was the sound of a missile being fired from the jet. And a second after we heard the missile, we heard what I can only describe as the whooshing sound as the missile flew past our hotel and struck its target directly across the Nile River. We carefully peeked through the curtains of our hotel room as the sky immediately lit up from the flames of the explosion. And all around us, the dark sky was painted an amber tint from the flames of burning buildings and vehicles being hit by airstrikes. The fighting never stopped. The entire night, we were abruptly woken up by the rattle of jets passing our hotel, the concussion of bombs, the sounds of unending gunfights. We woke up the next morning, we peeked out of our window, and we noticed a new hole in the roof of our hotel, not far from our room. Later, we found out that in the middle of the night, a mortar strike hit our hotel. And that's miracle number 1. Out of all the bombs that exploded and destroyed their targets all week long, somehow that bomb didn't explode. Later, they found it sitting in an office in the business center, unexploded, laying on the ground. Days 2 through 6 were filled with unending gunfights, close calls with bombs, trips to the basement for safety, fake news, ups and downs emotionally. Because of the danger of sleeping in our room, we moved downstairs to the floor of the spa in the basement. And for the remainder of our stay, we slept on pool chair cushions on the tile floor. And I just got to tell you, spa days really aren't that great. news of supposed ceasefires resulted in people trying to leave, while other hotel staff came to the hotel because it was safer than their homes. But every ceasefire wasn't. There was always shooting. Some left on foot, some drove themselves out, some made it to safety, others no one knew. Still others were turned back because they were shot at while trying to leave. And one day our Lebanese friend left. And the report we heard was that Abdurrahman never made it to his destination. Everyone assumed he was dead. Each day, someone, the government, private companies, the UN, other NGOs told us to be ready because they were coming. Our instructions were, be ready because when we come, you won't have much notice. We lived with our backpacks attached, our passports in our pockets, and always on edge. I slept fully dressed with shoes on for 5 days. All day, every day, we waited to be rescued. But no one ever came. The reports were always the same. We tried, but the fighting's too fierce. We can't get to you. Our mornings were filled with the expectations of being rescued, and our evenings were filled with the reality that no one was coming. It was difficult and discouraging, but we held on to hope. Every day we spent time in God's word, in worship, and in prayer, and our daily discouragement was met with a daily renewal from the Lord. He met us at our lowest, and he continued to remind us that he was there. And we clung to this verse through all of the disappointment and all of the discouragement. Psalms 20, verse 7. Some trust in chariots and some in horses. We trust in the name of the Lord our God. On day 7, after another full day of fighting, I noticed a new waiter in our restaurant. As he was serving us, we laughed with him and we asked him about his family, but I never caught his name. And as we were leaving, I introduced myself and I asked him his name, and he told me his name was Ahmad. We left dinner and we went back to the spa when it hit me. And tears filled my eyes as I realized that I had just met the guy in my dreams, the one that God wanted me to share his love with. And at that moment, it was like a light bulb came on. Could it be possible that the entire reason for everything we were going through, the reason that we were stuck in the Corinthia, the reason that no one could get to us was because it would take 6 days for Ahmad to show up at the hotel in the middle of a war, and he was on God's heart. My God concept allows for that. And I knew I had to talk to him. And that's miracle number 2. In the middle of the worst possible situation, God arranged a divine encounter. I went back and I pulled him aside and I told him I wanted to talk to him. Tears filled my eyes as I told Ahmad the dream that I had weeks before coming to Africa. That God told me I would meet him and he had a message just for him. I began to tell Ahmad that God loved him, that he knew his name, that he had a plan for his life. Tears filled his eyes. A big smile replaced the look of discouragement that was there before. And I asked Ahmad if I could pray with him. And together, in the middle of a civil war at the bar of the La Grille in the Corinthia Hotel basement, we prayed. It was one of the most special moments of my entire life. I prayed that God would bless Ahmad and his family, that he would have a divine encounter with Jesus. In July of 2023, I lost touch with Ahmad. I'm not sure if he's dead or alive. And sadly, the odds are that he's not. But my prayer is that Ahmad made the decision to put his faith and trust in Jesus. And that someday I'll be able to sit at the throne of Jesus with Ahmad and worship with him. That moment was encouraging. It was a reminder that we were in the will of God. In addition, we were encouraged because of the army of people praying for us and the teams back home who were working to get us out. One verse that we often repeated to ourselves was 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 16. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. We heard each day from my dad with reports of a new person who had joined the team who was working to get us out, politicians, military members, extraction specialists, and more. And I'll forever be grateful for all the people who tirelessly exhausted their resources and their contacts to find a way for us to escape. We remained hopeful that someone would come because we discovered that U.S. Embassy employees were also staying in our hotel. And we knew that the government had to come for them, that they wouldn't leave us behind. We had lost all faith and all trust in these private companies who said they were coming and they never came. But we knew the government was our key to escaping. And I remember one night telling my dad on the phone, my greatest fear is being left by the United States. Dad, they are our only hope. On day 8, we went to breakfast and we were quickly hit with a hard blow. The manager of the hotel told us that the embassy workers left in the middle of the night. Now, it was hard to hear because we were right there. But for some reason, they didn't take us. We let the team at home know, but they were still confident that they were going to come and extract us, that we just needed to be patient and not panic. And I snuck away in that moment to one of the massage rooms. And I laid on the table in the room and I just began to cry out to God because I knew in that moment that there was no one left to rescue us. We were going to be stuck there. What were we going to do? God, and if I'm honest, I was mad. God, you could stop the fighting if you wanted to. You could get us out. Why are we still here? And it wasn't an audible voice, but it's as close as it's ever been. The Lord said to me, do you trust me? Everyone and everything else has failed, but do you trust me? In that moment, God lovingly corrected me. I put my trust in everything and everyone else instead of trusting that He was in control no matter what. And my fears and my anxieties and frustration were met with a new sense of peace. God was in control. No matter what, I was going to trust Him. Because some trust in chariots, some trust in horses. We trust in the name of the Lord our God. Sunday, April 23rd, day 9 in the war zone. I woke up at 2:30 a.m. with a text from my dad about a possible extraction that night. Moments later, we lost all communication, Wi-Fi, and data. His last instructions to me were through text. And it said, if you hear a helicopter, go out to the parking lot and start waving your arms. It would have been a big risk because they were shooting anything that moved. Thank the Lord we had brought a satellite phone that we were able to use to communicate a few brief words through text. But our extraction never happened. And early that morning, the news confirmed that the U.S. Embassy had evacuated the country completely. They were gone. They left us. We were frustrated. We were hurt. But some trust in chariots. Some trust in horses. Some trust in governments. We trust in the name of the Lord our God. Our government let us down, but God is better than the government. It was a challenging time. Having limited communication with home was very difficult. On top of that, our team let us know that all of the options were falling apart at the same time. They were scrambling. But our trust and our hope and our faith were no longer in governments, companies, or people. We knew that the only way we would get out was God, that He would make a way in His timing. Day 10, Monday, April 24th, felt different from the start. We had lost all communication ability with our phones and service and internet, and our only way was to communicate with the SAT device where we could send some text messages. The problem was the only way we could really get service was to climb to the top of the hotel, to shimmy out to an open spot, and hide behind air conditioning so that they didn't shoot at us. At breakfast, a reporter from Al Jazeera, which is an Arabic Muslim TV network who had moved their crew into our hotel, asked us, why are you still at the hotel? To which we responded, well, we'd love to not be at the hotel, but no one can get to us, and we sure aren't going to go walking the streets of Khartoum while they're shooting at each other with tanks. And that's when we discovered that almost everyone had left. It was us, the news team, one really strange French guy, and a few hotel employees. At 9:30 a.m., we began having our God time, and worship was powerful. Something was different. The Spirit of God fell into our hotel room. Something was moving. Something was changing. Pastor Randy opened up his Bible and he began to read from 2 Samuel chapter 22. And that passage quickly turned from an encouraging declaration of the power of God into a prophecy over what was about to happen in our situation. And I just want to read part of it for you, verses 7 through 12. In my distress, I called to the Lord. I called out to my God. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came to his ears. The earth trembled and quaked. The foundations of the heavens shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils, consuming fire from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. And now, I want you to remember this verse, verse 12. He made darkness his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. At 1:30 p.m., we looked out of our window, and in the distance, we saw what looked like a dark cloud. Alberto, who has lived in Sudan a very long time, said, that can't be a cloud. It can't be. He said, we don't get clouds this time of the year. See, it was the dry, hot season in the desert of Sudan. They don't have clouds. They get sandstorms, but they never have rain. But this was clearly a dark cloud, and it was moving towards us. And we knew that this was a sign from God. Something was about to happen. And that's miracle number 3. The glory of God appeared like a dark cloud and cast its shadow over the entire city of Khartoum. At that moment, we got a message on the sat phone that the hotel was no longer safe and we had to leave immediately. We went to where Al Jazeera, the Arabic Muslim TV station, was staged in the hotel. We didn't realize it, but Pastor Randy had connected with Abdul the entire week, even prayed with him for his family. Turns out Abdul was the director of Al Jazeera for all of Sudan and was highly connected to high-ranking officials on both sides of the war. So we asked him if he'd be willing to get us to a place of safety. He called his personal driver, and they agreed to take us. Abdul told us to pack light, to be ready to call him if we had any trouble, that he would ensure our safety. I want to show you another verse from 2 Samuel chapter 22. Verse 44 says this, you have delivered me from the attacks of the peoples. You have preserved me as the head of nations. People I did not know now serve me. Strangers. We went to our room. We filled our backpacks with bottles of water and a few essential items. Moments later, there was a knock on our door. The driver was ready to go. We ran to the lobby. We were about to walk outside when suddenly our phones started dinging and receiving notifications. It's miracle number 4. Somehow, even though communications were blocked, our connection was restored just as we were about to leave. We quickly called our families. I told my dad we were leaving, and he handed the phone to my wife, Meredith, for the hardest 8-second phone call of my life. And we cried, but in my heart, I knew that we had nothing to fear because I knew that God was going to deliver us to safety. We hung up, walked outside. And the moment we walked out the front door, the thickest of the dark clouds were over us. And a raindrop fell and hit the ground. We knew this was a sign from God. And as we walked down the ramp to the car, rain slapped the concrete all around us. Miracle number 5. We were filled with peace even as we walked outside into the war zone to begin a drive that had resulted in death for many others. We hopped in the Al Jazeera van. We began our 25-minute drive through the middle of the city to a hotel on the other side of town called the Rotana. Miracle number 6. For the first time in 10 days, we never heard a gunshot. The entire drive, there was nothing but peace. It was one of the worst scenes I've ever seen in my life. We passed through 2 different checkpoints with no trouble. We drove past countless militia members who didn't even look at us. The now rain-soaked streets were littered with bullet casings, holes in every building we passed from tanks and mortars and RPGs, and I'll never forget the smell. The only way I can describe it is just the smell of war. Our driver carefully navigated through the back alleys, through the dirt roads and the fields, and finally, after 25 minutes, we pulled into the Rotana in an Al Jazeera van. And that's miracle number 7. God used the most unlikely method possible to get us to safety. The Arabic Muslim TV network loaded 3 American preachers and a missionary into their van and drove them to safety. Only God could do that. And guess who was standing at the front door of the Rotana when we pulled up? It was our Lebanese friend that we thought was dead, Abdullah. Sadly, we had made it to the safer hotel, but our missionary was still separated from his wife and his 2 teenage daughters. You see, they were also stuck in the middle of the heavy fighting on another part of town. That morning, the girls had run out of food and water, so they decided to leave the apartment on foot and walk 3 miles through heavy fighting to make it to the Rotana. Their journey took them through the middle of the RSF territory, which are the bad guys. They're known for committing horrible atrocities to women. When we arrived to the Rotana, the girls were still making their way to us, but we had no way to communicate with them, and we couldn't get to them. Alberto tried to go, but he had to turn back because it was too dangerous. 3 of us were standing outside the front door of the Rotana when 2 RSF trucks pulled up to the entrance, filled with armed soldiers wielding RPGs, 50 caliber machine guns mounted to the back of their trucks. People panicked. They ran inside. They hid behind bushes. They dove behind pillars. They laid on the ground. We were scared. The trucks pulled up around and stopped, and they motioned to Alberto to come. And suddenly, the back door of the truck opened, and out crawled his wife and his 2 daughters. And that's miracle number 8. The RSF, the bad guys, the Islamic extremists delivered the girls to us and to safety. Only God could do that. We were safe, but we still had to escape Sudan. And we had 2 significant obstacles in front of us: the desert and the Red Sea. Sounds kind of familiar, right? The next morning, we got on a very scary bus with other refugees for a 17-hour ride through the desert. It was our only option. There had been reports of buses breaking down in the desert, looters robbing buses, the RSF assaulting people making the journey. The road was the worst road that I've ever been on, and I'm from Arkansas. Many times, it was just sand. The other bus traveling with us broke down in the middle of the desert. We were stopped at 17 military checkpoints by either the military or the RSF. It was the longest 17 hours ever. But miracle number 9, our bus never broke down. We had no trouble at checkpoints. And after 17 hours, we made it to Port Sudan. When we arrived at Port Sudan, we went to a refugee staging area where there were 700 other people trying to escape Sudan. There were reports of people having to wait 2 days to get their passport stamps to be able to board ships. Within 5 hours of waiting outside in the middle of the night, we had our passports stamped. And 7 hours later, we boarded a Saudi Arabian Navy warship. And that's miracle number 10. God delivered us from Sudan across the Red Sea using the Saudi Navy. Saudi, the capital of Islam. After 21 hours of laying on the top deck of the Saudi warship, we arrived in Jeddah, and 2 days later, 14 days after the war began, we arrived home and we were reunited with our families. Some trust in chariots. Some trust in horses. But we trust in the name of the Lord our God. There's so many lessons that we learned during our time in Sudan. I will never be the same. We are closer to God than ever before. We have greater faith for what God can do. But I think the most important lesson for all of us to learn is that nothing is impossible for God. Our situation seemed hopeless and impossible, but God was able to do the impossible. Miracle after miracle, God did what no one else could do. And all glory and honor go to him. I don't know what you're facing. I don't know what your situation looks like. I don't know what you're going through. Perhaps you're going through something that you feel is impossible. Maybe the doctors have said there's nothing that can be done. Maybe you feel like it's even too impossible for God to do the miracle that needs to take place. I get it. I've been in a hopeless and impossible situation. But I want you to know, the same God who made a cloud appear over a desert city and bring a rainstorm in the middle of a war so that I could be alive and standing here today, that same God can do the impossible in your life. He sees you, he knows you, he cares for you. And when you put your trust and your hope and your faith in him, he will continually do the exceedingly and abundantly more than you could ever ask or imagine.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button below and turn on notifications for our YouTube channel. That way you'll be notified when we post more life-giving videos and when we go live for our weekend services. We'll see you next time.